Welcome to Art History. Today's lecture topic will be Tiwanaku and Wari Art. So in this lecture, we are going to move away from the early intermediate period, which is the period that we looked at in the last couple of lectures, focusing on Nazca chiefdoms and also the Moche state. Now we're going to move into the middle horizon and take a look at two interconnected empires, the Tiwanaku and the Wari. Whether or not these states actually functioned as full empires is a little bit debated, but in your text, Art of the Andes by Rebecca R. Stone, they do refer to it as two interconnected empires, so I will be using that term somewhat loosely in this lecture. Tiwanaku and Wari Art has some of the some very exciting abstraction in their textiles and their artwork. There's a lot of really beautiful color and bold patterns, and I really look forward to checking out some of this art with you during this lecture. So we'll talk a bit about the stylistic qualities of Tiwanaku and Wari art, imperial styles, some stylistic similarities and differences we see in Tiwanaku and Wari art, and we'll take a look at architecture, sculpture, goldwork, ceramics, and fiber arts. So, like I mentioned, we're moving away from the early intermediate period, and most of the artwork that we'll be looking at today falls into the middle horizon period. So, although the beginnings of these empires were in the early intermediate period, they mostly lie within the middle horizon period. So early intermediate period is from 100 BCE to 600 CE. Most of the artwork we'll look at is from the middle horizon period today, which is from 600 to about 1000 CE. So these empires do overlap quite a bit with the Moche culture, the culture we looked at last week. And Wari culture estimates to be from between around 450 to 900 CE, and Tiwanaku from about 200 to 1100 CE. Different sources will be a bit, might be a few years off from this, but these are the approximate date ranges for these cultures that we'll be looking at today. So the Tiwanaku were dominant in the south, in mostly what is today Bolivia. They began to flourish in the early intermediate period, and they reached their height late in the first millennium CE. The Wari culture, which is also sometimes spelled Huari, especially if you are looking at scholarship written in Spanish, it's often spelled with an H. But it makes that same sound, Wari. The Wari were centered in the Ayacucho Valley between about 500 to 900 CE. So 450 or 500 to 900 CE. So these are the approximate ranges of these interconnected empires. And some of the ways that these cultures functioned as empires is through the creation of road systems, terracing the landscape for increased production of agriculture, the transportation of llamas and other camelids from the highlands down into the lowlands, using them for trade and also as sources of wool, meat, etc. And we also see an ability to create very cohesive aesthetics and also large works of architecture, which of course require quite a bit of social cohesion and control of labor and resources. So we do see a lot of those major keys for building a large empire. It's also been noted that a lot of the Inca Empire's methods and success in becoming a very large empire later on in the Andes, they took a lot of notes from the Wari culture and also Tiwanaku as well. Tiwanaku and Wari art recalled the transformational imagery of earlier Andean traditions, particularly in the staff-bearing and transformational imagery, which we've seen at Chavin. They produced elevated stone architecture, processional movement, and also rituals in which they would consume sacred entheogens to induce shamanic trance. There isn't a lot of direct evidence that these Wari and Tiwanaku empires actually knew of Chavin art, but we do see that the Middle Horizon aesthetics took age-old expressions in new directions, often reflecting imperial concerns. We will look at some of the ways that Tiwanaku was quite different and distinct from the Wari, but we will see that both of these empires like to use public stone architecture and emphasize the importance of highland animals like llamas. So, of course, these two major cultures did not come out of a vacuum. We have a couple of different precursor cultures, which these cultures very much borrowed upon. So in the second millennium BCE, the Wankarani culture near the south shore of Lake Titicaca was a very prominent culture. Around 1200 BCE, the site of Chiripa near the south shore of Lake Titicaca created great public monumental religious art. The Pucará culture, which I have an image here, we have this kind of abstracted human face with this black and white pupilled eye. We'll definitely see this aesthetic in later Wari depictions of faces. So the Pucará culture is very much connected to these two cultures. Pucará existed between about 200 BCE and about 300 CE. We'll look at a sculpture from them in just a second as well. We also have the Warpa culture north of Pucará. So these are other cultures that we should acknowledge in the emergence of the Wari and the Tiwanaku. So this is an example of a Pucará stone sculpture of a man holding a trophy head. The Tiwanaku sculptures oftentimes look very similar to this. This is an example of one that we'll look at Tiwanaku's main ceremonial center. This is called the Ponce monolith. But you can see these kind of blocky stone effigies of humans and this stone stela. You see these very large kind of rounded rectangular eyes. This is a later Tiwanaku sculpture, and this is the Pucará sculpture. So scholars have definitely seen a connection between the aesthetics of the Pucará sculptures and the public Tiwanaku sculptures as well. So it seems as though trophy heads were important to them. The mouth is open in this sculpture. It seems to be speaking. So we have this effort of presenting the human form in this way in both the Pucará culture and the later Tiwanaku culture. All right, let's first talk about Tiwanaku. So Tiwanaku again is focuses mainly between about 200 and 1100 CE. They are located and kind of surrounding the region of Lake Titicaca. Their regions included present-day Bolivia and southern Peru, and also influence into the modern-day countries of Chile and Argentina. Their main city center was here at Tiwanaku, with a population of about 25,000 to 40,000 at its peak, with the ceremonial centers featuring a tiered pyramid known as the Acapana and a temple complex known as the Calasasia. The north coast of Peru was not inactive after the fall of the Moche around 800 CE. There are a couple other cultures, including the Lambayeque and the Chimu, that succeeded them and built impressive monuments and cities. However, the Tiwanaku civilization was again centered here in present-day Lake Titicaca region, and its cultural influence spread quite widely. The population of Tiwanaku's main city consisted of elites, farmers, llama herders, fishermen, and artisans. And then it, of course, has this wonderful ceremonial center, which features a tiered pyramid and a temple complex. But let's talk about Lake Titicaca pretty quickly. This is a humongous lake that is at a very high elevation at the base of the Andes Mountains. So it's basically a large inland sea. Today it's kind of overfished, so there's not as many resources available to the people there today as there were in antiquity. But it was a great source of fish, proteins and food sources from the water. And it's over 600 feet deep at certain points, and it dominates the altiplano, which is a term used for the wide high plains. In this area, they are around 12,600 feet in altitude. 12,600 feet is definitely high enough to give you a bit of altitude sickness if you are living somewhere close to sea level. Actually, many of the people who have lived here, their cultures have lived here for a very long time, actually proportionally have larger kind of rib cage lung capacity compared to other people who didn't culturally grow up in these areas with not a lot of oxygen in the air. So that is very high altitude. I believe the Mount Whitney is the highest point in the continental U.S., and that is a mountain that's only a little over 14,000 feet in altitude. So this is pretty high. And of course, this was a great resource for fish and waterfowl, and also just for agriculture. A convenient way for them to get nutrients was from the bottom of the lake as well. So it's a very, very large lake. That's basically an inland sea. This is a view of the island of the Sun. This is an island in Lake Titicaca, so it is a big enough lake to have a very large island in it. This island was considered sacred to many of the cultures surrounding Lake Titicaca. It also was one of the few places where corn or maize would actually grow in this region. Not a whole lot of plants grow super well in the naturally salty soil and very high elevation here. However, the main product that they grew in antiquity and today is potatoes. So the economic advantages of environmental balancing, combined herding and alcohol agriculture, gave rise to surpluses that allowed true urbanism to evolve, even in this rather inhospitable landscape. During the first millennium BCE, the initial village gradually grew, and by 100 AD or CE, the monumental stone architecture was being built. Tiwanaku's kind of peak time is considered between about 400 and 800 CE, and then it declined around 1000 AD. And at its height, the core area covered around 4 square miles and housed between about 25,000 and 70,000 people. So let's take a look at the Tiwanaku's main cultural and religious site. So its ceremonial features include that tiered pyramid, a temple complex known as the Kalasasaya. Also, Pumupunku is just south of the main center, featured finely cut right angle stonework. And then we call these large monoliths that are placed upright at the center of plazas a taipikala, and this refers to the stone in the center. So these stones that probably have some sort of astrological functions. They may cast a shadow, letting people know what time it is, kind of like a sundial clock. And we see these as far back as the Karal Supe, but we have them here in Tiwanaku as well. Let's take a look at, this is Pumupunku. So this is an example of Pumupunku. This is just south of this main ceremonial complex at Tiwanaku. You notice these perfectly right angle cut blocks of stone, which is something that's quite difficult to do. And we can see that they have these perfectly incised geometric shapes in them as well. And let's go to, let me see, Tiwanaku. This is an example of that Taipekala, that stone in the center. This is one of the subterranean temple complex areas at near the Sun Gate at Tiwanaku. So we have a lot of impressive stonework here, and let's check it out. This is a photograph, a vintage photograph of one of the large monolithic statues at Tiwanaku. So let's just first break down a couple of the different types of stonework that were employed at Tiwanaku. So we have ashlar masonry and also random range masonry. Ashlar masonry refers to squared stones in regular rows. They may be in different heights, but they're all in these perfect square rows. So this is an example of ashlar masonry, and this is a detail from the Akapana, that large stepped pyramidal structure at Tiwanaku. Random range masonry refers to different sizes of rectangular stones that are not laid in regular courses or not in rows. So this is an example from the semi-subterranean temple. So you can see that although many of these stones are squared off in rows, not all of them are. We have these large intrusions of these much bigger rocks fit in here. And so the stone workers are making it work with these kind of randomly ranged stones. So here's some schematic plans of the early phase of Tiwanaku above and at its height down here. So we have the Akapana is this stepped tiered pyramidal structure. It's, it's not quite, you wouldn't look at this and think pyramid necessarily because it's so flat on the top, but it does have a semi-subterranean temple at the top of it. This is the semi-subterranean temple that we'll look at today. And then Pumapunku is just to the south of that. So Pumapunku has unfortunately been used as kind of a spolia graveyard. So we call spolia when cultures take or people take stones and columns and building materials from older sites and then reuse and repurpose them in newer sites. So unfortunately, because Pumapunku has all of this amazingly finely cut right angular stones, a lot of it has been taken away over the years to build different things with. So what's been left here is kind of a random arrangement of Lego blocks. And for a long time, scholars weren't really sure what to make of these blocks at Pumapunku. Obviously, they took a lot of time and effort to cut in these perfect right angles until recently. So archaeologist Alexei Vronrich and his team at the University of California, Berkeley used 3D printing to recreate the Pumapunku temple in Bolivia. So here are some examples of some more of these finely carved architectural fragments at Pumapunku. This stepped diamond pattern is something that appears in Middle Horizon as well as later Inca textiles. This is called the Chicana or the Andean cross. So this particular pattern, you'll want to know that that's referred to as the Chicana or the Andean cross. Now back to our friend at UC Berkeley. Basically what he did is they took all these measurements of the stones at Pumapunku that are kind of randomly just laid out there. They took all the measurements, inputted them into a 3D printer, and basically created like Lego pieces of all of the stonework. And then Alexei Vranrich and a bunch of grad students just started playing basically Legos with these blocks and trying to figure out how they would best fit together. So here are some models of what the Pumapunku structures may have originally looked like, simply based on how these stones fit together in their experimental archaeology. So that's another reason why I like having people do these visual projects to go along with your research project, because that's actually something that art historians and archaeologists can do, and it can help us learn a lot about these different structures. So it's possible that it was this kind of chain of rooms and buildings that linked together like Legos. Here are some ways in which these large stone blocks fit together. Here's an example of the little 3D printed model with the researchers figuring out how Pumapunku was fit together. But let's move back over to the main central ceremonial center of Tiwanaku. So we'll mostly be focusing on the Akapana today, the semi-subterranean court, and the Kala Sasya, with the Akapana being that stepped man-made pyramid, which is basically a man-made holy mountain. So again, this is a reconstruction of what the Akapana mound may have looked like originally with its stone-faced tiers. Something interesting was engineered within this. The Akapana basically functioned as a man-made fountain. So if it was raining, this basin at the top would collect the rainwater, and then it was engineered to have all of these different distributions of the water that would stream down the faces of these stepped tiered areas and distribute water all down this mountain like a loud, noisy, layered fountain. So this temple also was originally faced with blue-green gravel that was imported to fill the Akapana. So there was a lot of connections here with sacred water, sacred rainfall, control of water, control of chaos. And Miller writes, one could interpret this as a claim that Tiwanaku's Puma transforming shamans could ensure that water continually flowed from the mountains to give the Tiwanaku people their life. So that's, a mention to that control of chaos that we see with these large urban plannings. The Puma tenon heads dotted its surface, and a burial of a high priest held a Puma effigy incense burner. So this, a lot of this Puma imagery lets us know that these shamans or spiritual leaders, perhaps political leaders, had a lot of connections to Puma iconography. And this is a view a little bit further out showing the Akapana with that that semi-subterranean temple court down here. So a lot of the pictures we'll be looking at in just a moment are from down here, and then you can kind of look through the gate. So that's where we're viewing right now. We're going to jump down here and we'll be looking right this way. So the semi-subterranean court served as a way in which people of Tiwanaku could express their connections to past cultures while creating their own unique architectural and sculptural styles. It was completed between about 300 and 400 CE, and it's estimated to be the earliest monumental stone building constructed in the central ceremonial area. The subterranean court is kind of impressive due to its size. The sunken court style of building is found in many of the archaeological sites which predate the founding of Tiwanaku in the regions surrounding Lake Titicaca, such as Pucará and Chiripa, but the semi-subterranean court is the largest found to this date. Its increased size was likely a statement of growing political power by the emerging Tiwanaku polity. And then we also have these large stone markers in the center of this courtyard as well. You can see the shadow falling on them, which of course may have functioned a bit like a solar sundial. Yeah, a sundial, exactly. And again, the term for that is tapikala, that center stone in the center. And then we're looking up through this gateway into the next temple over. You can see there's these tenon heads down here. These tenon heads kind of stick out and jut out. There are quite a lot of potential astronomical alignments of the semi-subterranean court, also sometimes called the semi-subterranean temple. We have the alignment to the southern celestial pole, kind of straight down the middle, and a few different basically the stones, the tall stones on the outside, all seem to lead out to different equinoxes. And some folks have wondered how much of the outside walls are actually reconstructed, but we do know that the pillars themselves are very important and are where they are supposed to be. This is a view of Tiwanaku with the semi-subterranean court at the right. And then we have this larger section right here. But this, you can see the tenon heads here on the semi-subterranean court in Tiwanaku with these larger stones that seem to have astronomical alignments with them as well. Here's a side-by-side of the Pumupunku style carvings with those tenon heads. And the tenon heads are one example of heads where we see kind of different approaches to depicting people, and they are believed to represent the range of ethnicities or communities who are governed by the Tiwanaku polity and who attended the ceremonies in the court. It is still unknown if they were contributed by the groups they represent willingly or by force, but there are a couple different styles of faces in these tenon heads. There's also a potential connection between these tenon heads and the tenon heads at Chavin de Wantar. This is from that much older late formative to early horizon culture. So there are some connections here with Chavin, with the tenon heads, with the transformational imagery, with the Puma references, and also once we get to the sun gate, we'll talk a little bit about the staffed figures that are very similar to some of the figures that we saw at Chavin de Wantar. This is the Ponce monolith. This is the one that I compared to that Puka Ra statue. It stands at the far end opposite of the so-called Gateway of the Sun on Tiwanaku's esplanade. It's carved of stone. We see these rather large rectilinear and slightly rounded eyes. And then the presentation of this human body is kind of a little bit blocky and a little bit abstracted, but there are quite a lot of details carved into the surface. And many scholars have looked at this and connected that to the primacy of textile within Tiwanaku culture and within many of the other Andean cultures as well. A lot of what we know about Andean cultures is from the Inca culture, the Inca Empire, because they were the main empire during the contact with the Spanish. And so we have a lot of scholarship written by the Spanish about their practices. But we do know, at least in the Inca culture, that textiles were burned regularly for sacrifice to the gods because you sacrifice whatever is most precious to you. And textiles, the amount of labor that went into, raising llamas and alpacas, feeding them, shearing them, spinning the wool, dyeing the wool with dyes from bugs and vegetables. That's before you even get into actually weaving these textiles. They're just this huge amount of human labor that goes into them, and they seem to, in many of these cultures, be the most prized item that people are buried with and that are used in sacrificial situations as well. So that's one of the things that's taken away about the three-dimensional artwork that we see in these cultures, and the effort that's taken to emphasize the surface pattern. This is the Bennett monolith from Tiwanaku. This one is 24 feet high, and it's the largest known figure of this culture. So it's pretty tall, and here we have laid out some of the details, kind of unwrapped the carvings that go all the way around the edge of the Bennett monolith. The Bennett monolith is named for a prominent archaeologist named Wendell C. Bennett. It's the tallest Andean stela at 24 feet, and it's a little bit bigger than the Ponce stela that's featured in the Colossasia. But this one shares the typical blocky facial features, this tight columnar form, and all over shallow relief carving, which is probably a reference to textiles. This figure is holding onto two ritual objects. It's holding onto a karo and also snuff tablets for inhaling and snuffing entheogens. And it features shells, batons, and many other details as well. This one is literally clothed in a bunch of shamanic visions, including frontal raid face motifs, and San Pedro cactus flowers sprouting from crowns. All over the body we have human, wait, where's my zoomed in picture? This is the Bennett monolith. It's a little bit grainy, but we have these figures marching in profile with these batons. We have these frontal-faced raid beings. We also have a couple of different standing llamas, and again, some of these cacti that are full of mescaline, which is a very powerful entheogen. So it seems as though there is a big effort in the Bennett monolith to present a lot of these kind of shamanic visions and resources for creating trances along the surface pattern here. The llamas are shown carrying some of these entheogenic cactuses, which shows that they had to import a lot of these materials as well. The San Pedro cactus flowers are a very important motif in Tiwanaku art. The actual white flowers bloom at night, which is kind of opposite of most plants and really underscore this otherworldly access to kind of this nighttime realm. Also, the San Pedro cactus flower can be visually substituted sometimes for condor feathers, puma hairs, and textile fringe, just like we see snakes emanating from things in Chavin art. And sometimes we'll see these flowers popping out from the top of staffs, just like these flowers pop out from the top of the San Pedro cactus. Which brings us to the Sun Gate. The Sun Gate is possibly one of the most well-known and iconic works of public art from Tiwanaku. The Sun Gate is the foremost decorated portal showing the portal god, which is sometimes also could have some overlaps with the staff god, or perhaps later on may have some connections to the Inca god Viracocha. The Inca actually had a legend that Viracocha and the beginning of the world started at Lake Titicaca. So there are some connections there, but it is possible that the later culture applied their beliefs retrospectively to this area. So it is kind of hard to tell which direction those connections are coming from. But there are definitely some iconographical similarities between this central raid figure with staffs and the so-called staff god from Chavin de Huantar and the later Inca god Viracocha. So this central figure is surrounded by winged attendant figures with bird and human heads. This imagery was very much spread throughout the Tiwanaku and Wari empires. We see a lot of it via textiles as well. This is from the early intermediate to the middle horizon period. So it's this very large stone block portal. Unfortunately, this portal was broken, probably from an earthquake, and was left in a bit of a disarray for a very long time. And unfortunately, the era in which archaeologists tried to set this back up and restore it was an era where the main focus was just to fix things to make them look good for tourists, and not necessarily putting the main focus on putting things exactly where they were in antiquity. So unfortunately, there's no way for us to know whether or not this gate had any astronomical implications or like solstice implications, because it was not reset up in the exact place where it had fallen over. So it probably had some sort of connection to stars or equinoxes or solstices, but it's unclear today what those connections may have been originally. Here's a bit of a closer look at that central gateway god or raid deity. It may be some sort of solar deity, as it has these rays coming out of the head. Some resources will give this figure masculine pronouns. However, the garment is a bit ambiguous, and it could be feminine, or it could not necessarily have a gender. So this is probably some sort of solar deity there. The sunburst headdress ends in puma heads, and this figure holds onto two staffs with condor heads on them. And then if you look closely, you can see this top row, we have people with human heads carrying staves, facing and attending this figure with a row in between of these bird-headed shaman figures in procession as well. And I have a little detail there. This is the drawing of one of the human or raptor-headed angels that converge on the gateway god from the lintel of the gateway of the sun. So it's unclear if these are meant to be perhaps masked performers wearing bird heads, or if this speaks more to the shamanic transformation where shamans can kind of go into these different states of being to contact spiritual enlightenment or spiritual messages. So here's a close-up of that. This is a drawing of the center portion of the sun gate. So its Tiwanaku style is more angular than Chavin, and the sun gate has a strong gridded organization that adds to the geometric feel. The central figure of the sun gate, while sharing the frontality of the staff god from Chavin and the front pose with arms at the sides, elbows bent, and vertical objects in its grasp, it's also different from these earlier iterations. The head is very disproportionately large. It's rendered in a higher relief than the rest of the figure, and the features projecting shapes that may represent the sun. Here you can see in more detail how some of these rays emanate in puma heads, much like many of the rays at Chavin emanate in snake heads. So let's see here. In the hands of this deity, they hold projectiles, including a spear thrower, and then weapons rather than elaborate staffs. So the sun gate figure stands atop a stepped pyramid shape with serpentine figures emerging from it, which could be a representation of the Akapana pyramid, which we just looked at, which mirrored the nearby sacred mountain, not only in shape, but also by having a series of internal and external channels that allowed rainwater to cascade down the side of the structure, like the above and below ground rivers of the mountain. This one does stand in the same pose as the Chavin staff god. It's also associated with natural forces, including waters, and then the feline heads emanating from these rays are joined by the bird-human hybrid attendant figures in rows to either side. So let's go back and look at this together so we can see this figure is standing on that stepped pyramid shape, which probably echoes the Akapana. And it has these almost like teardrops coming out the eyes, all of these hidden faces. It may be wearing a belt or a fringe of trophy heads, or this could just be textile designs. And then the hands are carrying weapons that terminate in bird heads. So there's a lot of bird and puma iconography in the sun gate. And then there's also these kind of winged attendant figures. This is from the Bennett monolith, but there's a lot of obviously similarities between the Bennett monolith carvings and the sun gate, which makes sense because it's coming from the same culture. However, we do see this really strong geometric linear kind of squared off aesthetic when we're looking at Tiwanaku art. This is a spear thrower, so that is one of the things that the sun god here is holding on to. And a spear thrower allows you to throw a spear much farther and with much more force than just your arm alone because of science. So this is a spear thrower. All right, next up we'll look at some of the ways that the Tiwanaku incorporated a lot of their state and religious imagery into portable arts. So we'll look at some examples including keros, which are beakers for drinking, typically drinking chicha or corn beer. Textiles, this was likely another Andean culture in which textile primacy was very important, which means it was probably the most highly valued trade good. There's also some examples of portrait head vessels in your book on page 144. It's possible that the Tiwanaku had similar rituals to the Inca in that they would sometimes drink out of their enemies' skulls. We're not sure if Tiwanaku actually did that, but we do have examples of portrait head vessels. And then snuff tablets for Anandananthra rituals, so some of their entheogenic rituals. More often we have Tiwanaku style ceramics that elaborately are painted and enter a little bit of three-dimensional form here. For example, this beaker where the frontal figure's face is in the third dimension, but everything else here is flat. Many of these portable arts include staffs, condors, and San Pedro flowers, which are related to of course, the entheogenic rituals. So here, this rayed figure on this kero. So a kero is a beaker used for drinking, usually for chicha or corn-based beer, just like you might use wine glasses specifically for wine. Typically, these beakers called keros were used for corn beer. We can see this rayed figure is very similar to the one on the sun gate. It's frontal. It's wearing this garment. It's carrying two staffed objects, staff-like objects, and then we have, in this case, condor heads and puma heads coming out of these emanations off the rayed face. This one's from the Middle Horizon period. We also have this example of a wooden kero with carved attendant staff-bearer figures. In this case, they're moving to the left. The staff is held to the left center and the figure's head is upturned up here. The legs are bent down here and the wings are out to the right. The kero form was taken up by the Incas and continued into colonial times. So cylindrical beakers with flaring sides are again called keros. Sometimes that word is spelled with a K. They're a vessel form that was popular when the cities of Wari and Tiwanaku dominated the central and southern Andes. They were used for the consumption of chicha, which is corn beer, during ceremonies and everyday gatherings, and they played an important role in the maintenance of social and political relations. Keros were made of wood, fired clay, gold, silver. All of the material reflected the different social status of the owner. They are decorated on the exterior with religious imagery and geometric motifs. On the circumference of this particular kero are 4 anthropomorphized winged figures in low but crisp relief. In this rather abstract carving style, we see a distortion of the figures and the dense ornamentation that are characteristic of Tiwanaku art. All 4 of the figures carry the staffs in their right hands. That is a symbol of status and authority in ancient Peru. 2 have feline faces looking skyward. The other 2 have raptor heads facing forward. Their wings are tipped with profile animal heads, a much used convention in Tiwanaku art. The cup was probably found in the coastal desert region where preservation conditions for organic materials such as wood are best due to the lack of moisture in the soil in which it was buried. So some of these, this is a rollout of the carved designs. So we see the upturned heads and then the frontal facing heads are the raptors. A lot of the organic material that we have from Tiwanaku and Wari cultures are on these portable objects that were taken to drier climates where they have survived a bit better. This is a miniature Tiwanaku style tunic with human-headed attendant figures. These are the attendant figures. They alternate in red and white. Only 12 inches wide. This tunic would have not even been able to fit a baby, but it represents a virtuoso offering with over 80 threads per centimeter. It was created during the Middle Horizon. So this exquisite miniature tunic has been woven with the utmost care with more than 200 threads per inch. The minuteness of this weave suggests that it was made of vicuña fiber, the finest hair of all South American camelids. Too small for even a baby, this tunic was likely a devotional object, perhaps placed in the burial of an important person. The repeating figure has a human body with a feline head and carries a staff terminating in an eagle or condor head, both symbols of power. Other Wari motifs include the vertical split eye, a teardrop line below the eye that doubles as an animal, and the N-shaped canines. So here we can see those canines. We can see the termination animal head on the staff, and these slightly abstracted, but still very human forms. This is a close-up of the Wari Tiwanaku style miniature tunic. So the Wari, this one's been called the Tiwanaku style tunic, which brings us to the Wari, also sometimes spelled Huarei. They came into power and prominence between about 450 and 1000 CE. And they flourished in the coastal and highland areas of ancient Peru, based at their capital of Huari, spelt with an H. I know that's kind of confusing. The Wari successfully exploited the diverse landscapes they controlled to construct an empire administered by provincial capitals connected by a large road network. And many scholars believe that the Inca got their road inspiration for that big road network from the Wari, or they inherited a lot of that, I guess you could say. Their methods of maintaining an empire and artistic style would have a significant influence on the later Inca civilization. The Wari were contemporary with other great Middle Horizon cultures centered at Tiwanaku and Pucará. The more militaristic Wari were also gifted agriculturalists, and they constructed canals to irrigate terraced fields. Terracing is a really ingenious method for being able to produce agriculture on steep slopes without causing erosion. It's pretty fascinating for those of you who are interested in like agriculture and engineering. The economic stability and prosperity that this brought allowed the Wari to implement combined strategy of military might, economic benefits, and distinct artistic imagery to forge an empire across ancient Peru. Their superior management of the land also helped them resist the 30-year drought period, which during the end of the 6th century CE contributed to the decline of the neighboring Nazca and Moche civilizations. But even in their heyday, the Wari were no strangers to violence. In earlier work, Tung has studied their practice of decapitating captives from conquered communities to create mummified trophy heads. This isn't new. We've seen this with Nazca as well. But as long as the empire was strong, the violence was ritualized and limited. From previous excavations, Tung found that in Imperial Wari, only 20% of adult skulls had healed skull fractures, which are evidence of non-lethal head injuries, and barely any had suffered fatal wounds. So we do see that there is violence, of course, in this empire, but it seems to be limited during the normal times. All right, let's talk about the capital city of Wari. Wari grew up in an organic way. So when we look at a picture of the plan of the city of Wari, we see that the streets and the buildings are kind of placed at random organically rather than on a strict grid structure. It was approximately 6 square miles at its height, population between 10,000 and 70,000 at the largest, and it was abandoned about 800 CE. So the capital at Wari is 25 kilometers north of modern Ayacucho. It's located at an altitude of 2,800 meters, and it's spread over 15 square kilometers. It was first settled around 250 CE and eventually had a population, again, possibly as high as 70,000 at its peak. Wari shows typical features of Andean architecture and includes densely packed wall enclosed rectilinear structures, which can be further divided into a maze of compartments. The city's walls are massive, up to 10 meters high, which is around 30 feet high and 4 meters thick, and built using largely unworked stones set with a mud mortar. Buildings had 2 or 3 stories. Courtyards were lined with stone benches set in the walls, and drains were stone lined. So they really had a lot of civic engineering here. The floors and walls of buildings were generally covered with plaster and painted white. There is little distinction in Wari architecture between public and private buildings, and little evidence of town planning. A royal palace has been identified in the northwest section of the city, its oldest area of habitation. A now ruined temple was located in the Moradushayak compound in the southeast of the city. All right, let's check out the city. So here we have the plan of the architecture of the central city of Wari, the capital city of the northern the northern Middle Horizon Empire. It's a freeform arrangement, contrasts strongly with the axial plan of Tiwanaku, which we looked at just a moment ago, as does the stonework. So it's very off, not on that rigid geometric square. We do know that there's quite a bit of polygonal stonework in the wall that underlies the courtyard level. So in the 6th century, it was painted red in a semi-subterranean temple with Tiwanaku-style stonework. The temple was never fully excavated and is unfortunately now destroyed, but there was a temple here that had a lot of similarities with the Tiwanaku. So we do see that these empires shared a lot with each other. Let's check out Pikalakta. This is the Wari administrative and military compound. It's located at the southern end of the Cuzco Valley at 10,660 feet in elevation. Again, you could get kind of elevation sick if you flew there without acclimatizing. This one is laid out on a very strict grid plan, so this shows us that it did not appear organically and that it was probably built later once the empire had the power to plan something and execute it kind of in one fell plan. It included tall walls that were originally plastered, and the word Pikalatka is a later Quechua word used for flea town or small town. So let's check it out. Here's the typical Wari style wall at Pikalakta. These are multi-story rough stone walls that were built by Wari subjects in sections. So some scholars believe that part of your community's tax to the empire was to dedicate certain portions of your calendar year to doing working building projects, and that perhaps it was built in sections because it's possible that different communities built different sections. Let's take a look on maps at what this looks like today. So it's a really rigid grid pattern, but you wouldn't know that walking on the surface of it because as you can see, there's quite a bit of varying elevations here. But when we look at it from above, let me layer this again. When we look at it from above, it's very organized on a grid. Sorry, that took a second to get that layer in, but you can see what I'm saying now. All right, let's go back to the slides. So here we have the plan of Pikalakta, the Wari Provincial Center between the capitals of Wari and Tiwanaku. At the single entrance near the southern corner pierces the enormous high-walled complex. The terrain actually slopes 262 feet from one side to the other. And in a similar way, Wari tunics impose their rectilinear format over the human body. So we see this focus on the rectilinear, on right angles, and on order over chaos. Order meaning this grid format even over this varying elevation like we saw in the photosphere. So let's look at some of the art objects that were discovered at Picolactica. So two caches containing 40 greenstone figurines were discovered in 1927. And then figurines of metal, shell, and stone were discovered again in 2004. And then more of these metal sculptures, tiny figurines, were discovered in 2019. And most of these figurines are barely 2 inches tall. So they're quite small and buried in caches. Here is the first. This includes the greenstone figures found at Picolactica. These show elaborately dressed elites. However, Miller points out that the fancy clothing and hats, but the patterns on them do not correspond to known Wari tunics, which suggests they were perhaps fulfilled a different state role than the tunic wearers. So there could be a connection there between these kind of unfamiliar patterns of tunics and these small devotional objects. Here are some copper and gold figurines that were found in 2004 at Picolactica. These warriors at the bottom are holding whips and weapons and shields. And then at the top, we have bound nude victims. We also have images of Puma transformed shamans. So we definitely seem to see this power play between captors and captives. Again, it seems as though in a lot of Andean art, nudity is related to kind of being vulnerable and having your power and identity stripped away from you. And then we also have these kind of transformational pumas, which may speak to that transformational power of shamans. Here are a few images from the discovery in 2019. So we see this cache that includes shells and these greenstone and these metallic objects. Here's one of these little figurines carrying a spear and a shield. Here's the shell, more of these kind of transformational beings, which is pretty interesting. And here they are all together. All right, let's talk a little bit about Wari fiber arts. Wari textiles are some of their most kind of iconic works of art. I did upload a Smart History video about one of these Wari textiles to Canvas, which I would suggest that you watch. Either you can pause this video and watch it, or watch it after you watch this one. But a few key elements that we see in Wari fiber arts are that Wari design favors rectilinear geometric structure, repeated but consciously varied elements. So you can see that there's quite a bit of harmony in these repeated elements, but you see that they do vary from each other in kind of unexpected ways. We see deliberate anomalies as well, and stepped diamond designs, which is an element that they shared with Tiwanaku. So here, even inside of these graphic notations, we see this stepped pyramid, or sorry, stepped diamond design within a lot of these images. We also see their love for these strong contrasting colors, including indigo and a red dye that was probably made from picking parasitic insects off of cacti, which was in itself a very laborious adventure. This is a tunic fragment from about 500 to 800. It's made out of camelid wool, camelid referring to llamas and alpacas. Here is the Chicana, the Andean stepped cross pattern. This is a Wari textile which is made out of individual pieces woven into the shape of stepped triangles, then tie-dyed in various color combinations, and then sewn back together. So a little bit like quilting. Here we see irregular patterning was embraced, as in the tapestry tunics. So you can see that there is somewhat regularity of the alternation of these colors, but they seem to be intentionally not super regular or super predictable. So this does kind of speak to this idea of containing and controlling chaos, which as an empire, the Wari were able to control the chaos of the unpredictable weather patterns, including the El Nino, including droughts, and that their control of these resources allowed the empire to not fall apart when there was chaos, like environmental chaos. We do have some examples, many examples from the Wari culture of these piled hats, these four-cornered hats. We see some of them include these like winged llama figures. We see examples of figurines, three-dimensional figurines wearing similar hats, like this silver person carved or made from silver in the Wari culture. Here's another example of this bird-like being. We see contrasting colors, a rectilinear geometric approach to abstraction here, and just their love of colors. Whenever we see these blue colors, we know that these were probably made with indigo, which is a transformational dye, in that you don't know exactly what color blue it's going to be until you pull it out of the dye, and then it changes before your eyes. So even these blue colors are a transformational experience. So it's been noted by many scholars that there's a strong connection between abstraction and trance. We also see a prevalence of San Pedro cactus flower in Middle Horizon iconography in both the Tiwanaku and Wari. And these San Pedro cactus flowers obviously refer to the shamanic rituals that in which the San Pedro cactus was used to induce trances. So here we have some drawings. These are also shown on pages 156 through 157 of your textbook. But we have this starting image of the bird-headed Sungate staff-bearing attendant, and then we have these different iterations of this staff-bearing bird motif in some of the different ways that we see this in Tiwanaku and Wari art. Of course, when you are weaving, you are somewhat limited to a rectilinear grid, and so it's very possible that these this move towards abstraction was a natural result of interpreting works of art that are carved into works of art that are woven. And so we seem to see this really playful abstraction and distortion happening within these textile arts, to the point where at the end you would barely know that this was supposed to be representational at all if you didn't have all of these transitional pieces to show you that this is, even this at the end is showing us this staff bearer attendant figure. All right. So here we have the so-called Lima tapestry, which is a masterfully abstract interpretation of the staff-bearing attendant figure. Maybe you can pause this video and see if you can recognize some of the elements here from the staff-bearing figure as it is transformed into the so-called Lima tapestry, and there are some hints here. So yeah, knock yourself out with that one. Oh, I forgot I put these next to each other. Yeah. So you can check out some of the ways in which this has been totally abstracted and kind of squished into the edges here. This is a Wari tapestry tunic, which includes 479 stepped frets and a single profile face motif down here. And such intentional anomalies appear in different but analogous ways in most Wari tunics, and many symbol the contribution of individual weavers to the set design. So in ancient Andean cultures, including the Wari Empire, clothing communicated much more than style. A ceremonial tunic like this was an object of great prestige. Its production required the cooperation of a large community of skilled individuals. Because it took so long to create, multiple weavers would often collaborate on a single piece. On close inspection, variation in the weaver's individual styles can be seen in the weave structure, as well as the interpretation of the repeating pattern. Before the weavers could begin their work, several other professionals were required. Agricultural specialists bred the animals and cultivated the cotton. Applied chemists created a variety of distinctive, long-lasting dyes, and finally, highly skilled spinners made a thread so consistent that even today's most advanced machinery cannot duplicate it. The finished product symbolized the convergence of both the natural and the human world, and for the elite, where it signified the ability to command these resources. So check that out. What we see in Wari art is that oftentimes the rules of Wari art, of repetition, of geometry, of abstraction, was to break the rules. So we have this intentional offset pattern, which includes this abstracted human profile. Here's another example of a Wari tapestry panel. A lot of times when we see this circle with one half one color and one half the other, that refers to an eye. So we see these profile humans, profile animals. The closer, if you just looked at this from afar, you might not know these are faces, but maybe by now you've recognized these profile faces, these fanged-like teeth. This one's wearing one of those four-cornered tasseled hats. Here's a little frontal face figure. Yeah, so knock yourself out looking at these kind of abstracted images from Wari textiles. They're quite lovely. And we'll finish off by looking at a couple of Wari metalworks and ceramics. Many of these other works of three-dimensional art are a reflection of textile primacy. Again, that idea that textile is the most valuable commodity of all time for these people. So the silver figure to the right shows high detail in expressing the textile patterns. You can see there's definitely a lot of effort being put into showing his textiles. We see a strong Nazca influence in their ceramics, which makes sense because the Wari conquered the South Coast region, which included the Nazca. So this hammered silver figure shows the typical Wari four-cornered hat and tunic, as well as a shield and a spear thrower, like on the sun gate. This piece was originally one of a pair. So one of them was the silver one and one of them was rendered in gold. So that speaks to this Andean idea of duality and balance. So it speaks to Aini, that concept. This is an example of a Wari ceramic pharaoh with a typical wide-eyed face and a very complex headdress. An ancient break right here was repaired by drilling holes and lacing the pieces together. So probably wouldn't hold water very well, but I guess you could just drink out of the other side of your cup. So here we have another example of this face being three-dimensional while the rest of it is two-dimensional, and we see another effort to display the surface patterns here. And then finally, here is a Wari ceramic bowl with condor-headed transformational figure. We see the San Pedro cactus flowers in the headdress above and corn cobs around the face. So we see these transformational beings, again, speaking to trance. We have the abstraction speaking to trance, the actual depictions of the San Pedro cactus speaking to trance, and this cohesive imperial style that we find all across this North Coast area. So that concludes our look at the Wari and Tiwanaku.